Good afternoon and welcome to the Livewire, UNC Charlotte's forum for conversations with newsmakers from here on campus and beyond. I'm Will City. It's happened to most of us who've played a sport, gone to the gym, or are just sort of clumsy. You slip chasing a faster player, plant a leg funny on a treadmill, or trip stepping off a curb. That ankle turns and before you know it, you're on the ground. For a long time, ankle sprains have been understood as a painful annoyance, something you can get over in a relatively short time with ice and rest. But new research at UNC Charlotte is calling into question the long-term effects of the injury. Dr. Tricia Hubbard-Turner is an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology and UNC Charlotte Athletic Training Coordinator. Her research on ankle sprains was featured by the New York Times this week, and she joins me in studio today to discuss it. Dr. Hubbard-Turner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's start off. Just give me a quick snapshot of some of the conclusions you were able to reach with this research.
The biggest, in terms of outcomes we had from our studies, was seeing that when you have someone, whether it's in a human or an animal model, who has either an acute or a new ankle sprain, or who has a history of ankle sprains, they're less physically active. And so over time, I think a lot of folks think it's just an ankle sprain. But that single ankle sprain over time can decrease activity levels. And we also know decreased activity levels can lead to a whole host of chronic disease development. And so I think now having this evidence that really supports the fact that that acute ankle sprain or that long-term ankle sprain can really cause potentially bigger issues as the person ages.
Now, before we get into the specifics of these two studies that you recently conducted, let's take a look at the structure of the ankle itself. Could you just explain to me what happens when someone sprains their ankle?
Okay. So by far the most common mechanism for an ankle sprain is when someone, so if this is your foot, when you turn your ankle inwards, so to invert or plantar flex the ankle. And what happens is on the outside or the lateral aspect of your ankle, you have three primary ligaments which stabilize the ankle joint. And those three ligaments, when the foot turns inward, are stretched. And if that stretch goes too far, essentially what happens is those ligaments tear. And that tear could be anything as small as like micro tearing, so small tears, to a full-on tear where the entire ligament is torn, similar to like what we would think about when someone like tears their ACL. So there's a variance in terms of the amount of damage that can occur when you have someone that rolls their ankle.
Sure. And I was a little bit surprised by how common these are in the percentages. Could you share some of those numbers about just how common these injuries are?
If you look at all orthopedic injuries, ankle sprains are the most common injury. So even though you may hear a lot about concussions and ACL tears, and those injuries are important and significant, but in terms of a day-to-day basis, ankle sprains are the most common orthopedic pathology that we have.
Now, many of these injuries are sports-related. I'm curious, what's the connection between some of the movements in these sports that we play and our ankles? Are our ankles well adapted to be making some of these rapid lateral movements?
Not entirely. If you think about the ankle joint, it is a very small joint, and it has to bear your total body weight. And then when you look at sports like football, basketball, soccer, volleyball, where you have lots of fast start, stop, jumping maneuvers, even if you have perfect field conditions, sometimes it's just too much for the ankle to handle, and so then it's forcefully turned inward. But then also you have times where you don't have the best field conditions, and it's not necessarily the ankle or the body, it's just they step in a hole. But no, and there are things that you can do to maybe help that, but in terms of general, it's hard on the ankle, these sports and these activities.
Chronic ankle instability is a big part of these recent studies. Could you talk to me about that and its connection to ankle sprains?
So when someone has an ankle sprain, ideally what would happen is you'd sprain your ankle, the ligaments that surround the ankle that were sprained would heal, and then you would go through like a rehabilitation protocol to strengthen, to work on balance, and other things that become impaired when you have any kind of joint-related injury. But an estimated anywhere around typically upwards of 70% of people who sprain their ankle end up not getting fully better. And so the development of chronic ankle instability occurs when they have that ankle sprain. maybe they don't go through rehab, or even some folks do go through rehab, but they still have instability. So their ankle feels looser. They'll report pain. Sometimes they'll say their ankle feels weak, or probably one of the bigger complaints you have is, I feel like my ankle is going to give out. Mm-hmm. So I go try to play basketball, and when I go to run or jump, I feel like my ankle is going to give way. Or sometimes they'll actually say my ankle does give way, and it almost feels like another ankle sprain in terms of kind of what they had originally.
Something else you and your colleagues wrestle with in this research is the specific functional mechanism that's causing these problems in people with these ankle problems. And you talk about ankle laxity, changes in neuromuscular, skeletal control, and then subjective fears that there's something wrong with the ankle. How hard is it to separate out what's causing these issues for people with ankle problems?
It's hard because it's obviously not going to be the same in everybody. I think one of the biggest things we've seen in our lab, as well as working with other researchers, is it's a mixture of things. There definitely seems to be people who sprain their ankle who they have this laxity or looseness. You know, so when you feel and test the ankle, there's more motion. And then we also tend to see people who have these balance impairments. So, you know, when you take someone who has a history of ankle sprains and chronic ankle instability, they struggle with maintaining balance or stance. And those two things are going to be somewhat interrelated, because when you have damage to the ligament and that doesn't heal, you know, you have nerves that surround the ligament and those are damaged. And if those don't heal appropriately, and if the way essentially the central and peripheral nervous system aren't retrained, then we have these balance alterations as well. And so they kind of interact and work together. And some people will have more of one and more of the other, or less of the other. And then you also have folks that, you know, exactly subjectively, they have a whole host of symptoms they'll talk about and limitations. And then you have some that don't have as much. And so there's definitely a spectrum of injury and a spectrum of disability when you have people who have ankle sprains and then chronic ankle instability development.
Let's shift over to talking some specifics about this research. The title of your first study was An Acute Lateral Ankle Sprain Significantly Decreases Physical Activity Across the Lifespan. Now that first study was conducted on mice. Correct. How did you come to that conclusion? And just tell me what was happening in this study.
Well, I've always had previously been involved in human-related research. So, you know, you bring someone in who has ankle instability, ankle sprain, and you measure changes, so subjective and more functional changes. But it came to a point where I said, what's really the bigger impact, or what really is the bigger changes that occur with an ankle sprain? And we have some great research and faculty here at UNC Charlotte that have strong backgrounds in animal research. And through kind of conversations and talking, it kind of came out that, well, what if we looked at the animal model and we looked at a prospective longitudinal study to really see what the effects are of an ankle sprain across a lifespan? Obviously, that research really can't be done in a human. And so what we did was we just went and looked in the literature and found a way to essentially sprain an ankle in a mouse model. And the nice thing is the mouse anatomy is identical to the human anatomy in terms of kind of how it looks from a ligament standpoint. And then once we sprain the ligaments within the mice, follow that mice along its natural lifespan. And measure physical activity every single day. So all the mice had access to running wheels. So it's completely voluntary. So if the mice didn't want to run, they didn't have to run. If the mice wanted to run, you know, and so every day we would have students that would go down and they would record the distance and then the duration of that physical activity. And then we followed it until the natural end of the mice's lifespan. And we really weren't sure what we would find. We knew acutely, so after we sprained the mouse's ankle, we were pretty confident that the mice that had, because essentially what we did was we had a group of mice that didn't have an ankle sprain. We had a group of mice that had what we would consider to be a minor ankle sprain. And then we had a group of mice that had a severe ankle sprain. And we knew acutely that the mice with the ankle sprains, both groups, would probably be less physically active, which is somewhat natural, right? When you have an ankle sprain, your ankle hurts, there may be some swelling, and so you're just not going to want to run. But we figured maybe within 4 or 6 weeks that we would see that kind of go away, which we didn't. Across the entire lifespan, the mice with the severe ankle sprains were significantly less physically active, so they ran less. compared to the mice with the minor sprain as well as the no ankle sprain group. But even the mice with the minor sprain, they were less physically active for most of the lifespan.
And this is a type of mouse that likes to be active, right?
Correct. So these mice that we chose, genetically, they're bred to run. And we chose them on purpose because we kind of wanted to somewhat, as much as possible, mimic an athletic, recreational, active person, which most people who are participating in sport, they are driven to be active. And I think then they sprain their ankle and they do have that drive to want to get back out to the sport or the activity. And so we felt like we wanted to have a mouse that does want to run. So even with that genetic predisposition, they chose not to run.
Well, I was browsing the comments on your New York Times article, which can be a dangerous thing to do no matter what the topic is. But I did see a few people raise the concern about some unnecessary suffering of these mice. And then I referenced your study to kind of see what protocols were gone through in that regard. And there are pretty significant regulations and things being done to make sure that these mice aren't suffering, correct?
Correct, right. So even before we could begin the study, we have to go through specific approval. And that approval is vetted by a group of faculty as well as a veterinarian that's here on staff. That reviews the protocol, and their whole job is to make sure animal welfare and health are really at the top priority. So when we did the actual surgery to induce the ankle sprain, the mice were under anesthesia. And then once they were done with the surgery, they were given similar to what a person would take, a pain-killing Tylenol type medicine. But I can tell you those mice, as soon as they were up and awake and off the anesthesia, they had a little limp. But honestly, within 2 to 3 days, with the exception of visually looking at their ankle, you would never know that they underwent surgery. So our research staff, as well as the students that work on a research team, as well as the folks that are in charge of and run the facility here, their priority is making sure the animals are not in pain or pain is minimized as much as possible. And then the care afterwards is top notch. So they're very well taken care of.
I want to highlight a selection from the discussion of this study that I found particularly interesting. Quote, "We are not aware of any other studies that have used other musculoskeletal injury models and measured physical activity. This lack of research on orthopedic injury and physical activity is quite concerning." Why?
Physical activity is one of the third biggest predictors of death and mortality in our country. If you look at physical inactivity, the host of chronic diseases, from diabetes to cardiovascular related diseases, pulmonary related diseases, the literature is so strong and really showing and speaking to the impact physical inactivity can have on the overall health and well-being. And one thing we know, physical inactivity, does decrease naturally over the lifespan. So as you age, we are less active. And part of that's, right, you maybe have children, you have a job, priorities change. But we know we have a lot of activity early on, usually due to sports and athletic participation. And so it was surprising. We know how common all these orthopedic injuries are. You look at college athletics, professional sports, but even amateur, right, in high school and recreational activities. We have all these injuries, but we really don't ever look at what happens 4, 5, 10 years down the line, after that patient sprains their ankle or even tears their ACL or, has a shoulder injury, whatever, the orthopedic pathology may be, is really trying to understand that long-term implication and that impact it could have. And not only activity, but also well-being and mental health and all that stuff.
Sure. Moving to the next study, which was human-based, who are you studying here and how did you take these measurements?
So we knew one of the bigger comments we would get, when people look at animal literature, a lot of times they say, well, it's an animal. It doesn't necessarily apply to me as a person. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to at least somewhat try to assess and understand physical activity levels. So here, obviously, we have this great, huge college population of students. And so what we did is we wanted to regroup 2 groups of subjects, folks who've never sprained their ankles before and no other history of any kind of significant orthopedic injury. So from an orthopedic standpoint, they're physically healthy. And then we wanted to recruit a group of subjects that have chronic ankle instability. So at some point they sprain their ankle. And then after that ankle sprain, it never got better. And so they complain of their ankle having pain or instability or giving way. And then what we wanted to do is we gave them a pedometer that they would wear for 7 consecutive days. And they would wear that throughout the day. Pretty much the only time they were allowed to take it off was when they showered or at nighttime when they went to sleep. And every single day they had to check in with us to record and give us their step count for that day. We also had them fill out some questionnaires which assess physical activity and try to get a pretty good gauge of the, step count is one thing, but also trying to understand, moderate versus vigorous physical activity, the time spent within that. We even tried to talk to them about like time spent seated during the day. And we did this with both groups, but just trying to get at least a snapshot at one point in time what their activity levels are. And we found that those with the history of chronic ankle instability, or current chronic ankle instability, they were significantly less active in that time period compared to their healthy. And those controls were matched based on gender as well as age, body weight, and height. So we wanted to try to control for as many extraneous variables as possible. But they were significantly less active. And they also had, less activity in terms of like vigorous activity, so more exercise-related stuff, because obviously college students do walk a lot.
Right.
So we wanted to try to understand what they were doing activity-wise.
When read together with your previous study, is that strengthening the conclusions that you had?
Yeah, I think so. I think, the research that we've done so far, looking at now an animal model, as well as that study with the human model, and then now some of the other stuff we're doing is really starting to demonstrate that even that single ankle sprain or that single ankle sprain that may turn into ankle instability has led to or is leading to a decrease in physical activity levels.
And we do have a readout here of some of the things you were just mentioning, but if you could just quickly go over some of this and how it relates to what you were just discussing.
So you can see in the center of the table, CAI at the top stands for chronic ankle instability, and then next to that is the healthy group. So those are the means as well as the standard deviations. So on average, the group with the chronic ankle instability was just taking around 6,600 steps per day, whereas the healthy subjects were taking 8,800 steps per day. But then again, what we really want to look at too, when you go further down, was a big portion of the day was spent walking for both groups, which again isn't surprising because 5 of those days were academic calendar days.
If you spend any time on this campus,
right.
It's
a big campus.
There's some walking, yeah.
So we weren't surprised about that, but we were surprised, again, the difference. And one thing that's not up here, one of the other things we asked the students was about like bus use on campus, because the campus does have a very wide bus service, and the subjects that had chronic ankle instability subjectively reported using the bus more. So that would account maybe for the less time spent walking. They had more time spent seated, and then also one of the bigger things that we thought was important was they spent less time doing both moderate and vigorous activity. So which is really we're trying to capture the exercise component. The groups with chronic ankle instability were significantly less likely to do those types of activities than the group of healthy subjects.
Does the data suggest that chronic ankle instability affects this moderate and vigorous activity more than just walking? Is it clear on that?
No, it's not. Yeah, and we really didn't try to separate those two things out. But I think there definitely appears to be a relationship, at least based on kind of the stuff we've seen, that especially when you talk to these subjects and we give them subjective questionnaires asking them about the different symptoms, the activities they feel they can do. So like, when does your ankle bother you the most during like walking or running or jumping? But then also the part of the questionnaire is like going up and down a flight of stairs, getting in and out of bed more. And those subjects with chronic ankle instability consistently score lower on those questionnaires. And the biggest issues they always say is their ankle feels more unstable or is more painful when they walk, when they run, or when they jump. And so I think that's why they are less likely. And even when you talk to them, you'll talk to plenty of subjects who will say, I really used to love playing basketball, but I just can't do that anymore because it really hurts my ankle a lot. And I just really feel I'm going to sprain it again. So I don't do that activity anymore. And so I think they stay away from those more moderate to vigorous activities, either secondary to their symptoms or a fear of re-injury.
Sure. And we've touched on this concept of objective versus subjective ankle function. Do you think that humans have the chance of being affected more by any injury, and
Yeah.
we can talk about it in the context of ankle injury, because of the added sort of subjective dimension. Once we know we have an injury, we start being worried about it, and that can either make the pain worse, make us anticipate the injury, and aggravate something else.
Oh, for
Does
sure.
that come into play?
Oh, for sure. And that's one of the newer areas that we really haven't examined a whole lot here at UNC Charlotte. But there are some researchers that their whole area is looking at like fear avoidance or fear of re-injury, and looking at that. And there is a very large segment of the population that, they have that injury, maybe they do have some symptoms, and that then from a psychological standpoint, they really can't return because of that fear. So I definitely think that's part of it. And you definitely talk to people that subjectively report, more symptoms and some that less. And sometimes those match up when you do your more objective data assessment, like, oh, they really are reporting that their pain and their instability, and then you take your objective measurements and they match. And sometimes they don't, so sometimes you have that person that, subjectively reports it a lot more or less. So, which is interesting, that people definitely report things sometimes differently than other folks, and you see it differently in like a lab-based setting.
Right. And there are some experimental challenges that come along with studying humans in the world rather than animals in the lab.
Right.
What are those, and how did you address them?
Yeah. Well, the great thing about animal research is it is a very controlled environment. And when you do animal research, like for us when we did our study, genetically the mice are all identical. So you can't say that, well, maybe the reason why you found this is because some of the mice had a genetic predisposition, or they had a history of something, or, there was other extraneous variables. Everything is controlled. They all eat the same food. They're all in the same setting, same temperature, same water. So there's no extraneous or very little extraneous type variables. But obviously with humans, it's very different. You have folks that do different activities and report things differently. And, it is hard to follow people long term because, they move, especially in a college setting, they move, they graduate. And so it's harder to control stuff. So, with the human study, there's lots of stuff that could influence that activity level over a 7-day period. We tried to control some of it. If someone got sick, let's just say we had 2 subjects that in the middle of that 7 days, they got sick. And so we threw them out because obviously they're going to be less physically active, probably because they got sick. And so you have to try to control for some of that. Like we wouldn't do it over any of the holidays. We wanted it to be a traditional, normal week. And we would ask all the people that before they started in the study, in both groups, is this a normal week for you? If not, if you're going to be traveling or if you have something going on, we wanted to try to at least control somewhat for that. So ideally, it really was a good picture of what their normal everyday activity is.
So are there plans for any other studies of this type?
Yeah, no, we're really excited to, with the animal stuff, we have a great team and we want to try to look at some of the mechanisms behind it. So try to understand, what is happening maybe at a more basic level that's causing this decreased activity. Is it a lack of healing? Is it something maybe with an inflammatory response that's not allowing healing to occur? And so kind of look at some of that stuff, but then also look at too, we gave the ankle sprain study with the mice. All the mice had access to the wheels 3 days after injury. And we chose 3 days because normal inflammation typically resides within 3 days. So our thought was, that was really when the mice needed to be resting because they had this active inflammation. And we know that if you do activity during active inflammation then can't reside. But maybe they needed longer. Maybe if we had a group that got the wheel 7 days after injury, or even maybe 2 weeks after an injury, so they had more time to rest. Because I think that's one of the bigger issues we see with athletics is this drive to get kids back into participation. And so as soon as pain goes away, you play again. And maybe that's part of it, is we're not allowing healing to appropriately occur. So we want to look at that. One of the things we want to look at in our with human subjects is looking at, in addition to activity levels, is to look at overall health. Look at things like, body composition, look at cardiovascular function. So to see, even at a younger age, are these students that are less active, is that starting to cause changes in terms of, body fat percentages, overall kind of cardiovascular health, like so look at VO2 max and those type measures, to kind of, again, continue looking at that bigger picture in terms of how that ankle sprain could potentially lead to bigger issues.
In the few minutes that we have left, I want to talk a little bit about prevention and treatment. You mentioned that some of these injuries are just unavoidable, but are there things that people can do to either strengthen their ankle or in terms of footwear? Is there anything that can be done?
Yes. There have been a few good studies that have been shown if someone has ankle instability. So like I said, someone sprained their ankle 2 years ago, 5 years ago, but now still today they say, my ankle feels unstable, I have pain, I can't do activities. Probably there's two really good things that they could do. One, they can tape or brace their ankle. So someone who has a history of ankle sprains, either taping or bracing has been shown to be effective at helping stabilize the ankle, with bracing being more effective because bracing is typically more rigid and it stays tighter for longer than tape. But then the other big thing they can do is participate or do some form of a balance training program. And there's been a few studies showing that when you take someone who has ankle instability and put them in a 4 to 6 week balance training protocol, they get better. And they not only feel better subjectively, but they're less likely to have chronic kind of symptoms and problems. And the nice thing is it's stuff you can do at home, like the exercises are standing on one leg for 30 seconds and trying to hold that position. And then you can make it harder by closing your eyes or standing on like a mini trampoline or like even like a Bosu ball, something that's unstable. And then even make it harder by standing on like an unstable surface and like reaching down and like picking up a cone. Or if you don't have cones, put something on the floor and move it. To just really challenge the neuromuscular system. It's really effective. The other thing is like things like gaming systems like the Wii Fit is a great tool that isn't super expensive, but the Wii Fit has games which are really balance-orientated games. And there's been some research showing that the Wii Fit is really just as good as the fancy, expensive balance equipment we have in the research lab. And so it's stuff that folks can do to help get better and hopefully have less problems.
There seems to be some conflicting reports about treatment. Are there some solidly evidence-backed things that you think people should do if they do sprain their ankle?
First and foremost, they need to get treatment. I think the estimate is somewhere just about 50% of people who sprain their ankle never see any kind of medical professional.
And I think that may be a misconception there. Treatment, some people believe that's just put it on ice yourself. People should consult a professional.
Correct. You want to protect the joint, whether it's through some form of like an immobilization or a wrap to allow healing to occur. If you have a limp, you should be on crutches. You ideally should see somebody about it to make sure, one, to see the severity of it, but then two, in order to get a referral with most healthcare agencies, you have to have to get to like a physical therapist, a lot of times you have to have a referral from a physician. And so you really want to have that initial kind of, physician that sees the injury, helps you understand it, gives you that acute management, whether it be like a brace, wrap, immobilization device to allow healing to occur. And then from there, you are in a rehab protocol, whether it's led by an athletic trainer or physical therapist, where you go through exercises that help get the motion back, help with strengthening, help with balance, and then help with functional exercise to help strengthen and help the nerves function appropriately. So that way when they do return to activity, they return with a nice, good, strong, healthy ankle. I always like to say it's analogous to when someone, if you have an athlete that tears their ACL or sprains their MCL or has a shoulder injury or even a concussion, there's a set protocol that they go through before they're allowed to return to play. Ankle sprains should be no different. We should be seeking treatment and rehab to get them back to where they can return to participation versus I think what happens now, even if they maybe see a physician and do the ice and the rest, as soon as pain goes away, they'll start playing again. And the problem with that is the ligaments may not be healed and the nerves and the muscles may not be at the point where they can function appropriately to prevent kind of chronic joint injury.
Well, Dr. Hubbard Turner, that's about all the time we have this week. Thank you again for joining us. If you want to see more of Dr. Hubbard Turner's research on the long-term effects of ankle injuries, check out the New York Times Well blog, and you can find a full report. And tune in next week here on the Live Wire, same time, same place.